Today we're talking about a pretty incredible transformation. For decades, if you thought about Atlantic Canada, you probably thought about a region that was kind of stuck in the past. But recently, that whole story has been completely flipped on its head. So how did they pull it off? And maybe more importantly, are there cracks starting to show in this comeback story?
To really get how dramatic this turnaround is, you got to go back about 2 decades. I mean, look at this headline from the Globe and Mail in 2004. This pretty much sums up how a lot of people felt at the time, that the region was just destined for stagnation, unable to attract the people and the money it needed to grow.
Well, that old view, it's been completely shattered. A recent report from the Public Policy Forum called the Atlantic Canada Momentum Index found the region is in the middle of a genuine boom. They tracked 20 key economic and social indicators, and get this, a whopping 16 of them were showing accelerated improvement in recent years. So what changed? How did this happen? Well, a huge part of the answer, the engine behind this whole shift really, was a big collaborative plan launched back in 2016 called the Atlantic Growth Strategy. And this wasn't just some half-baked idea. It was a really targeted, all-hands-on-deck effort by the federal government and all 4 Atlantic provinces to fundamentally reboot the region's economy. Okay, so the strategy itself was built on these 5 key pillars. The idea was to bring in more skilled people through immigration, spark new ideas through innovation, pivot to a greener economy, sell more stuff to the rest of the world, and build up the modern infrastructure to make it all happen. It was a really ambitious plan, right? But the crazy thing is, the results started showing up almost immediately. And I mean, the results were pretty much immediate. In less than a year, the region added over 16,000 new jobs. And listen, these weren't just any old jobs. We're talking full-time positions. The job market there was actually growing faster than the rest of the country, which was a huge sign that real, stable economic activity was taking root. Okay, so another huge piece of this puzzle was reversing that population decline. Programs like the Atlantic Immigration Pilot were specifically designed to bring in skilled workers and their families. In 2017 alone, the region welcomed over 9,000 new permanent residents. It was basically a demographic lifeline of new talent and energy. And this wasn't just about what was happening at home either. It was about connecting with the rest of the world. And it was working. In just a single year, the value of their exports skyrocketed by 16% to $30 billion. That showed that businesses in Atlantic Canada were finding new customers and really competing on the global stage. And you can see here, this growth was spread out across a pretty diverse economy. I mean, sure, you still had traditional industries like mining and oil and gas, but sectors like real estate and trade were huge contributors too. So you've got this mix of new and old, painting a picture of a really complex and evolving economic engine. So, okay, on the surface, this is an amazing story, right? The population is booming, jobs are growing, the economy is buzzing. But is it really that simple? Is all this momentum actually built to last? Because when you start digging into the data, you start to see some warning lights flashing, some really deep-seated challenges that could put the brakes on this whole comeback. Yeah, let's go back to that momentum index for a second, because remember how I said 16 indicators were looking good? Well, that means 4 weren't. And these 4 gaps, they point to some fundamental weaknesses that have haunted the region for years. And, well, they're still there. So here they are. The 4 areas that are either flat or going in the wrong direction. Now, problems like access to healthcare and youth employment are obviously serious, but the 2 that are really setting off alarm bells for the region's long-term health, it's what's happening with people's incomes and, maybe most importantly, business investment. Okay, so why are those 2 so important? Why are we focusing on them? Because they are the fuel for productivity. And look, productivity isn't just some boring economist buzzword. It's basically how an economy gets smarter and more efficient. It's what lets you pay people more without sparking inflation. And this is where Atlantic Canada is falling behind. Dangerously behind. Now, to be fair, this isn't just an Atlantic Canada problem. Not by a long shot. Canada as a whole has a real issue with low business investment and weak productivity. But in the Atlantic provinces, this national problem, it gets amplified to a really worrying degree. And wow, this slide right here really shows you just how massive that gap is. Business R&D spending per person in Atlantic Canada is barely more than a third of the national average. And remember, that national average is already pretty terrible when you compare it to other developed countries. We're talking about a massive, massive innovation gap here. So this creates like a two-headed monster of a problem. First, you've got non-residential investment. That's the money businesses spend on the actual stuff, the machines, the tech, the buildings that make workers more productive. And that is way behind. Then, at the exact same time, you have this population boom. But the housing construction just isn't keeping up, which squeezes affordability and threatens to choke off future growth.
And it's really the heart of the issue for the entire country, as economist Charles Sayonat points out here. He's basically saying we're not putting our money where it counts, into the things that actually make us more competitive. And for Atlantic Canada, this national weakness is a critical vulnerability.
Okay, so with all that in mind, where does the region go from here? Well, the road ahead definitely looks like it could get a little bumpy. Forecasts are pointing to a slowdown, but they also show just how much more resilient the region has become. Yeah, if you look at TD Economics' forecast for 2026, you can see things are expected to cool off. GDP growth is slowing down, and you might even see employment dip a bit in some provinces. But look, this isn't the free fall of the old days. This shows an economy that can actually take a punch now, something it just couldn't do in the past. And maybe that's the biggest takeaway from all of this. Atlantic Canada has proved without a doubt that its story isn't written in stone. They engineered a massive comeback once. The next big challenge, the real test, is tackling those deep-seated problems with investment and productivity. Because as this quote suggests, the future isn't something that just happens to you. The outcome is in our hands to shape.